Good evening and welcome to Current Issue. With me tonight, the Special Agent in charge of DEA, Timothy Planso.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and of course, we have Steve. Steve, welcome again to MEA. We have with us Steve Francis, and he is a special in charge of Homeland Security investigation. So we're going to talk today about a major problem that hit every community, and not just in Michigan, but nationwide, the opiate. People getting overdose suddenly from drugs they used to take before, and now when they take them, it's getting overdose and result in death. If you could tell me, Timothy, what's the opiate? Is it the drugs? Is it a shot they take? Is it a liquid? What's the main opiate?
Sure. I mean, opiates or opioids it's usually starts in pill form. So and there's it's kind of complicated, but actually it's a pain medicine generally.
Is it pills?
Well, it starts in pills.
Okay.
Legitimate pharmaceutical opioids or pill forms.
Okay.
And there's many different variations of it. In treatment, there's morphine, and then there's other versions of opioids that are for treatment, and then heroin is also an opiate, and so all of those collectively or people would call them opioids or opiates.
Okay. What's the problem? Why we have? I mean, we years and years, probably hundreds of years, if it's not tens of years, hundreds of years, that people taking drugs like the marijuana, the cocaine, the heroin, and they adjust their brain or their body toward taking this. Why suddenly people dying from this?
It's a great question, and it's pretty complex. There's not just like a straight answer. It'd be great to be able to point a finger at just one event or but it's been actually kind of building for quite some time. Just anywhere from a social aspect to, but from my perspective in what we deal with, the prescription of drugs, almost 4 out of 5 users, as of a few years ago, 4 out of 5 users who became heroin addicts or opiate addicts who were using illicit opioids started using legal pills, and it happened in a variety of ways. It could have been sometimes it happens where people break a limb or break an arm, or an athlete gets hurt.
Okay.
In school or something like that, and the athlete starts using pills prescribed by a doctor,
like Vicodin?
Sure. Yes, sir. Vicodin, hydrocodone, things like that for the pain, and they continue to use it. The problem is that it's highly addictive. Opioids are very, very addictive, and in almost any form, which typically leads. So they start off with pills, and this is a typical path. Start off with pills, taking pain pills, and then they get addicted to it, and they want them even when they're not injured, and they want more pills. The pills become expensive, and it turns into heroin use quite typically.
Okay.
Then
because
heroin
is not enough for them, so they have to take more and more and something more stronger.
Basically, they're basically chasing that initial feeling that they had,
Yes.
and they continue to take it, and then they become more tolerant. That happens, and so the pills get expensive, and a lot of times it turns to heroin use. Sometimes it's snorting heroin. Sometimes it's more the benign ways of using heroin, if there is a benign way to use heroin, and then which turns to injecting. The Mexican cartels and the drug cartels in general turned in, so it became heroin use, and then all of a sudden they decided to start to infuse fentanyl, which is a far more potent drug than it's an opioid, but it is far more potent than heroin. So they started mixing fentanyl with heroin, and that started to happen. Well, there was a phase in the mid 2005 to 2007 when that happened here in the Detroit metropolitan area, but also other areas nationwide. And then in 2012, 2013, 2014, especially 2014, fentanyl and heroin mixtures were really becoming prevalent, and it's graduated now to much more potent types of fentanyl and synthetics and analogs of fentanyl, carfentanil and things like that, and also sometimes not even mixed with heroin, just straight fentanyl, carfentanil use. And
Steve, Homeland Security exists to protect our nation and our citizen. And honestly, this evil thing's coming worse than anything, and people dying from it more than anything. How you, as a protecting the nation, how you protecting our border, our citizen from drugs coming to America to them?
Yeah. So Homeland Security Investigations is the principal investigative arm of the Department of Homeland Security.
Yes.
It's a very broad jurisdiction, but one of our most critical investigative priorities is public safety, which includes identifying transnational organizations that are exploiting our borders. And what's being exploited now is these opioids coming from China, primarily China as a source country, and also some of the chemicals and precursors being shipped from China to Mexico and being smuggled across the border into the United States. So we have several initiatives around the country with Customs and Border Protection, the DEA, identifying packages that are coming into the United States that contain illicit opioids, fentanyl, carfentanil, and other drugs. So,
How they come from China?
so they're being shipped.
How they shipped? How about at the border? Nobody check at the border? Or,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Or at the port, or when it comes to custom?
No, absolutely. So almost every package is being inspected in one way or another. However, the mass quantity of packages that are coming across the border just creates vulnerabilities in the system where the shipments are being directly sent from China into the United States. So anyone through the dark web or really overtly or covertly can purchase opioids and illicit drugs across the dark web and into the United States. So
And they send it to them by the mail?
directly, yep, right to their
And
home.
the mail would not check anything, when it comes from China and they see a package with powder and all that, they don't check it?
No, absolutely. So I mean, it's being interdicted every day. So
Yeah.
tens of thousands of packages are being looked at and interdicted every single day. We're seizing fentanyl, illicit drugs. There's just at times it's really challenging for our inspectors, our officers, our agents at the border to inspect every single package that's coming to the United States. So it's very, very challenging for us. It's something, as Tim mentioned, since 2014, 15, but we've increased our efforts significantly. So for us, with Homeland Security Investigations, we initially were working narcotic smuggling investigations, probably 15 to 20% of our workload.
Mm-hmm.
It's in some areas it's moved to 50% of our workload is identifying packages in other areas that are being shipped into the United States.
Yesterday they were in news. They got a shipment worth over $750 million. $750 million shipment. They got it at the border. So imagine how much is coming if they get. This is probably a small portion of that.
I agree. I mean, I think it's definitely a challenge, but we're even looking at small amounts of fentanyl. The smallest amount of fentanyl, the tip of your fingertip can cause death. So every single package that's coming across the border, whether it's small amounts or very large amounts, could be deadly.
Okay, Timothy, Vicodin, that a lot of people take it, even the students, even in higher education, they take that. Mm-hmm. For how that turned to be a deadly, they add fentanyl to it. What they do to that pills to make it much stronger. I mean, I had an interview with Steve, and he said probably it's 10,000 times more than. So tell us more about it, please.
Sure, there's different levels of the opioid, and Vicodin being one of the kind of the less potent ones. And I don't have the actual potencies at the top of my head, but you can go from Vicodin to carfentanil, which is hundreds, if not thousands, of times more powerful. And as Steve mentioned, we're talking about something that you basically you progress to through addiction. It's just addiction is certainly a disease that it can be treated and it requires treatment. But it is a very, very large uphill battle once you start down the road of addiction. And Vicodin introduces a lot of people to opioids, and it progresses.
Is it the doctor prescription? Is it the pharmacist given that?
Well, In many instances, yes, and in many instances, no. Sometimes friends or people get our kids or anybody gets them from medicine cabinets. Sometimes you have grandparents or people who have pill bottles in their cabinets, and they save them for later, which is a mistake, because they not only do they potentially expire and become less effective, but also anybody could get their hands on them. I mean, there's instances where folks will go into open houses for real estate just to see if there's pills and check the cabinets, and it's happened.
I heard it in the news. Yeah.
Absolutely, and so there's many different avenues for those pills. So sometimes they're prescribed and sometimes there's not. And look, the one thing that DEA does is we have kind of two sides: the illicit narcotic side of the house, but also the diverted pharmaceutical side of the house, and we have an entire diversion team that works on that side, and we register every doctor and pharmacy in the United States who can prescribe drugs. There's about 51,000 here in Michigan alone. There's about 1.6 million registrants in the United States for pharmaceuticals. And the vast majority of doctors are amazing. They're healers. They do amazing work. There's some rogue doctors that are essentially just drug dealers.
That's the minority. That's what I call them, drug dealers.
And that's exactly what they are. They're drug dealers distributing the same poison that any drug dealer on the street is, and they're causing and feeding into the addiction problem just as well. There's other times when it's errant. I mean, and we work a lot with the medical community. And work on outreach and education, and the medical community is really responded very well, and they continue to need to respond to educate their patients, because if a doctor prescribes you a pill, Vicodin, for example, a lot of people would just take it and think the doctor prescribed it to me, I should take it, and they need to be very educated and very careful, and ask questions of their doctor, like, do I really need 30? Do I really need 10?
And every month.
Right, correct. Yes, sir. And if a lot of times the pain, and there's a lot of reasons. I mean, we could get it probably way too long for this program, is to really for them to get into the point of, like, people didn't want to feel pain in America. They didn't want their kid to feel pain, and so the medication and the opioid got much stronger. That's part of it, and there's many reasons why this problem has become so exacerbated, but it's certainly one of those things that needs to be addressed is educating the medical.
Yes, Steve, why don't you? Is it possible that you guys work with the medical community to stop that? To ask the drugs company not to prescribe or not to produce these kind of medicine that turn to be a killer to many of their patients.
Sure. I know there's a holistic approach from the government to work with the pharmaceutical companies, work with the Department of Justice and the administration. I know that the DEA, and I'll defer to Tim over here about the efforts that DEA is working with pharmaceutical companies, and I think some of the administrative as well as criminal aspects that they can push in that route. The DEA is who's working on those issues directly. I see.
What are you doing to? We done with the pharmacist and all that. The worst is the drug dealer in the street, which is they could add even more powerful to those drugs, so they could get the kids maybe addicted to it, so they be getting their money all the time. What are you doing as law enforcement investigation to combat those people, to take those people out of the street?
So there are a lot of efforts. I mean, we'll talk locally, and then I guess we can talk nationally. But here in Detroit, in Michigan, and Ohio, which are the two areas of responsibility for Tim and I, we have a lot of task forces that we work together on. For us, under Homeland Security, it's our Border Enforcement Security Task Force that works with Customs and Border Protection at the ports of entry, our Border Patrol agents, our CBP officers. We all have a lot of state, local, federal, and also foreign. So we have our Canadian partners that participate in some of our efforts of identifying the individuals that are exploiting our borders. As the drugs kind of flow into the streets, then we look at kind of federal targets locally of people that are, have an international nexus to it for Homeland Security investigation. Okay. And for the DEA, they handle pretty much everything.
Is there an organization that umbrella of all those departments, from the state police to the regular state police to city police to federal agency to local state, that working together toward this issue? anyone could.
Sure, certainly there's the HIDA, which is a high intensity drug trafficking area program.
So there is that
out of
organization.
Washington. They coordinate in almost every state. A lot of the drug task forces, not all of them, but the drug task forces that don't directly participate with HIDA still coordinate with HIDA. And then there's OCDEF, which is the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. I hope I got that correct. And so it's and that's comes out of the Department of Justice in Washington, and then they form it into regional areas. We all collaborate and participate with their funding mechanisms, their coordination mechanisms, and they all require multiple agencies to collaborate and work together. There's pretty much not an agency that Steve and I don't work with, be it state, local, or federal, on some level on any given day.
I see. Steve, what state that have more problem than other? Is it like in the north, in the south? We broadcast nationwide, and there is Middle Eastern American community almost in every state. So what are we talking, the worst state, and where the smuggler target?
I don't know if there's a particular area that the smugglers target, but for us, I think it's clearly Ohio. At least from what I'm seeing, it's kind of ground zero.
And why?
Well, I think there are a number of factors. The proximity of the state of Ohio to the distance between 5 other states. I think you can get to within 3 hours to 5 other states. So it's always been a distribution hub for narcotics, and then being distributed out into the outlining states. They've just, at least since I've been in the area, it's been something that the cartels have been embedded in the state of Ohio. So it's gone from heroin, and now fentanyl being 40 to 50 times more addictive than the heroin. It's continuing to grow in the state of Ohio. So last year, there's about 4,500 deaths in the state of Ohio. Wow. And I think in Michigan, Tim, is it under 2,000 here?
It's just under 3,000.
Under 3,000.
But it's gaining.
Yeah.
Michigan's not far behind.
Yeah. You mentioned grow. Did they grow this in here too? They grow the heroin and all that in the United States too, or is all of them comes from Central America or China?
Mexico.
Mexico. So they don't grow here, like grow marijuana, for example. They don't grow here.
Correct. It is not grown here.
It's all coming from. Okay. Do you have some successful of combating those in Ohio or Michigan, those drug dealers?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we have several, through the HIDA and our OCDEF strike forces, we have significant investigations that have resulted in large amounts of seizures in Michigan and Ohio. I mean, every day, we're dealing with, I think, a significant impact that we're having, either interdicting it at the ports of entry through the mail, or interdicting it in the streets of Detroit or Columbus, Ohio. The effort is, it's every day. Every single day. Like I mentioned earlier, so the smallest amount of fentanyl can kill a number of people. So as we interdict all of the illicit narcotics, and it's making an impact. So large amounts are great, of course, but I think even the smaller amounts with what we're dealing with this epidemic nationwide makes a significant impact. So we can't kind of ignore what's happening in the small amounts of seizures that we're having. So,
Tim, go ahead.
No, I thought a good example is what DEA had a significant seizure here in the Novi area that I thought was very impactful here in Oakland County.
Yeah, Tim, if somebody start, what's your advice to them? How they could avoid that? How could And honestly, I want you to address the whole family, the parents, the brothers, the sister. If one of the family start in this, and probably start by taking Vicodin, he think it's Vicodin that they used to take to, for shoulder injury. What's your advice to them? How they could combat that?
Well, number one is find a way to educate ourselves and us as a community. The parents, the schools, all have to be directly engaged, and not start is the best thing to do. And it seems like a simple answer, but quite frankly is the best way. Like I mentioned, it's a disease. It's treatable, but it's an uphill battle. So the best way to do that is not start, and that's the biggest advice I give. And it's everywhere. It touches all economic levels, all races, any type of person. And so that's the important advice too. Is it's in all schools, public and private, potentially. It's not, there's not one that's like that much worse than the other. That's really so. But if you get to the point where addiction starts, is know your family, know your kids, know your adult family members, and work on getting them into a treatment program. I'm not, that's kind of where my expertise.
I mean, we were supposed to have a doctor here to talk about this, but
Sure.
how about you? Go ahead.
Well, it's certainly, and just to kind of the level of the draw to addiction and the demand is where this product keeps coming in, and we certainly work with Homeland Security and all the other agencies. But one of the things that and Steve mentioned this, is that we seize kilograms and kilograms that affect, like 1 kilogram could potentially affect 50 to 100 to 150,000 people, or at least hits or lines or injections or drug usage, and so that's just 1 kilogram, and we seize kilograms and kilograms. But the cartels have this; they're business people. When it gets to that level, and they anticipate having a certain amount seized, and we try to, and so they know that, and they also try to create addiction. It's one of those things
That's the problem.
Is if they're out selling and they know that you and I are friends and you come with me and I'm buying, they might give you one for free to try, and that also fosters a lot of the addiction as well. So the biggest thing that folks need to understand is understand what your kids and family members are doing. Know what opioids can do to you and the level of addiction that it can cause, and it can be deadly and it can ruin lives.
I see. Steve, you want to add to that, because that's important, that message to the family.
Yeah, I think the statistics show it's usually, unfortunately, it's from a family or friend where people start taking a drug and becoming addicted. I think what Tim mentioned, education, prevention. I mean, we look at it from a kind of a three-pronged perspective and enforcement, but I think the most important part is the education prevention piece of it, right? We don't want anybody getting started on it, and obviously, with a lot of different gateway drugs that lead into, highly addictive narcotics is a concern for all of us, and I think for our children, and when we look at communities that are affected by it, the Middle Eastern communities, I mean, it's something that we need to continue to kind of be that close-knit community with education, prevention, and
if I may, I just have to interject, because the attitude towards drugs, and particularly over our careers, has changed, and where some drugs were taboo and others were really bad, and at the different escalation levels, those escalation levels seem to have really decreased in kind of the overall attitude in the sense, and that's obviously more anecdotal. I'm sure there's many studies, but it certainly
is the prices going down because people use it more and more?
It can be. There's instances where that's happened, where it's become much more affordable.
Yeah.
But it's also the attitude towards, well, this drug's kind of okay. I know it's illegal, but it's kind of okay, and it's not that bad for you. The problem with that is that it diminishes a lot of the drug use, and just drug use in general, which it's a slippery slope, just based on our experience.
Yeah, we're talking about the Middle Eastern community. There is in Michigan about over 500,000, in Virginia there is about close to 300,000, and I did an interview with Chief Patton of West of Bloomfield, Chief Haddad of Dearborn, and Chief Barron of Fairfax, Virginia. And they said this is the Middle Eastern community, this problem becoming a major problem. We're losing people to die every almost single day, and that's very, very scary. So and probably Steve, he's one of the community member. He knows more about the culture. But let me ask you, we have different culture, we have different custom. We like to keep the problem within ourselves. We don't like to our cousin or a friend or even oh, the federal agency of the police, they heard about it. Absolutely not. And we're not going. Do you have in your staff some Middle Eastern American people who understand both culture, so they could deal if something, God forbid, one of the community member used, to go to them, to talk to them, to understand the culture, to understand how they live. You know, they have that family value and want to protect their children with every way possible. So I'll start with you, Tim.
Well, I mean, certainly we have special agents and investigating diversion investigators that speak multiple different languages.
I mean, not talking just Middle Eastern.
Sure.
The Polish community, the Latino, you know.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
That's why we have multiple different
Diversity
languages.
is very important these days.
Absolutely, and it's one of those things that from that standpoint, we have multiple agents and diversion investigators speak many different languages throughout the United States. So we can always find somebody if there's concern or question. That said, when it starts to come down to treatment, and treatment does that as well, and that's where it's out of our realm. But there's many opportunities in multiple communities, whatever language or culture you identify with. There's help out there. Is kind of my point, and we can assist in that and point people in the right direction as far as treatment and help. There's the different Wayne County, Oakland County, they have health departments that can get you help as well, and I'm sure that would have been addressed. But that information is out there, and it's pretty readily available, especially with the internet nowadays.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So if and of course a lot of this, I mean, it's anonymous. It can be anonymous. It could.
Yes.
If you have a family problem, and maybe you just have questions, making calls to treatment programs or doctors and things like that is really the way to go once somebody starts down the road of addiction. But in terms of like enforcement, if you know somebody's dealing drugs or selling drugs or diverting pharmaceuticals or having pill parties, there's any of that, then there's folks to talk to at DEA, at Homeland Security, or any other law enforcement agency as well that are culturally diverse.
Yeah. Steve, I'm going to address that questions to you, and you know the community, if they have a problem, they don't want nobody to knows about it.
Yeah.
But if they have a problem and they call your department or DEA, is it possible to keep it quiet? Is it possible to keep it within the family? Because that culture, that things is very important in the family.
Absolutely. So, I'll go back to kind of reiterate what you said about it being a tight-knit family community, and people are ashamed by it, right? You don't want to embarrass your family and the family name, but I think that's the first step to admitting that you have an issue. But we will find resources through DEA, Homeland Security, for them to get support in the prevention and the treatment, really, and that's the important piece that we haven't probably talked about it enough, right? I think the treatment is the difficult part of it, and it's long-term sustainability of treatment and having that family support. I think in the community, you have that family support structure.
Yes, absolutely.
I think the addiction sometimes overpowers that, and I think that's where we can provide some additional resources for treatment. And you mentioned earlier about having officers of Middle Eastern backgrounds.
Understand both cultures and
I mean, so we do a Homeland Security, and I think most importantly we do within our state and local partners. That many of our officers in these communities, Oakland County, Wayne, Macomb, have Middle Eastern officers that can support the communities, and they do an outstanding job. So I think that's a big part of it, having the county support as well. But feel free to contact us at any time, and we will provide resources for the treatment.
I see. I want 1 minute from you each. A message to somebody who taken some painkiller medicine, and what's your advice to him? Because I know that pain, it could be added more and more and more. He'll end up taking the drugs that we're talking about. What's your message to them?
Right out of the gate, educate yourself and know what you're taking. And if you're a parent and it's somebody who's a child,
I mean, he might tell you
juvenile,
it's only Vicodin, it's only pain pills,
right, and it could only lead to death if you're not careful and you go down the road, the path towards addiction. It doesn't take much. Sometimes it just takes one dose, sometimes it takes multiple. Everybody's a little bit different. But we're talking about like probably the most powerful addiction that I've ever seen. I think any other drug. I mean, there's some drugs that are kind of close, but once you start going down the road of opioid addiction, you're talking about physiological addiction, and you're talking about just a constant craving, and it's very, very powerful. It's more powerful than any other drug that we've really experienced, and certainly in my career. I was around during the crack epidemic, and crack is a very addictive drug, but it's nowhere near as powerful as the opioids are. So somebody needs to understand what they're taking. We understand that there's pain. People, there's in various stages of pain, but do you really need a Vicodin when you could have taken ibuprofen or Tylenol or something? I am not a doctor. I don't profess to be. That's up to the doctors to really discuss with the patients. But
and this message to the doctor too.
Absolutely, and doctors need to have those conversations with the patients. It's vital, so they understand what they're taking, how many they're taking, and not to prescribe as many. Do you really need 30? Maybe why don't we start off with 3 or 5 and tell me and reassess that patient again. Again, I'm not telling doctors how to be doctors, because I certainly can't do that. But we need to rethink the way we're operating now, and that's the biggest message. Is if we keep doing what we've always been doing, this problem is not going to get any better. We need to talk. We need to start with the schools. We need to start with the with everybody, with the medical industry, and there's areas that we need to get better as law enforcement as well. Everybody has a responsibility to do something a little bit different, and we have a lot of different operations, a lot of different programs, and that we're working on and to change.
Yeah. Steve, as Tim said, these days we like to be comfortable. We don't like to take pain. But what's your message to a college a student that after he study and get a little bit headache and all that, to take this kind of pills? What's your message to him?
Well, I'll keep it really simple. It's taking these addictive drugs is going to kill you. So educate yourself. Be smart about what you are taking and ingesting in your body, because it's highly addictive and it usually ends in death.
Guys, thank you very much. I think honestly, on behalf of all the communities, we thank your effort. We thank the things that you do to prevent our kids, and not only kids, even adults, from taking those medicine. And we thank your effort for getting those drug dealers out of the way, and not just the drug dealers. I mentioned it in one time in a medical form, and I mentioned so bad some of the doctors becoming drug dealers. We thank your effort for getting those doctors to relay a message to them that enough is enough. You should realize you're doing a mistake, and you should be a professional and not killing your patient. Thank you so much for coming here, and thanks so much for the effort.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Dear viewers, that was my interview with Timothy Lansing, right?
Yes, sir.
And he is a special agent in charge of DEA, and Steve Francis, and he's a special agent in charge of the Homeland Security investigation. Dear viewer, we're talking about killing. We're talking about if you take these drugs, you might end up dead. And our message to the parents, to the family, to the friend, to advise your children, to advise your friend, because you don't want to lose a friend, you don't want to lose a child, to advise them, and to work with those kind of people who are working day of nights to protect us, Homeland Security, DEA, to protect those citizens of Michigan, of United States, from any harm. And I think this is the worst harm that happening today. So thanks for watching, and good night.